Perfect. Okay, so to kind of kick it off, welcome to Finding a Baseline, the Greenhouse Gas Inventory and Climate Vulnerability Assessment training session. My name is Brian, and Matt is my co-worker. We are the Regional Climate Smart Communities Coordinators for Schuyler, Steuben, and Chemung counties. So Matt, if you want to go to the next slide, I can just touch on the Climate Smart Communities program is a statewide initiative emphasizing municipalities taking the lead on climate action, and climate action at the local level can better serve the direct needs of the community. If you are in a community that's interested in this program, communities can receive state level recognition for their climate efforts, as well as a variety of other benefits through the program. And there are quite a few different actions that can be done through this program. Both the greenhouse gas inventory and climate vulnerability assessment that we're going to talk about today can be completed for points through the program. And both Matt and I have funding from the state to assist communities with any of these actions. So if it is something that you're interested in, please don't hesitate to reach out, and we will definitely assist you as best we can. One final quick note before Matt kicks it off with the greenhouse gas inventory. For those of you who need a certificate for planning board or zoning board of appeals credit, we'll be sending those out hopefully by early to mid next week. And if you have any kind of technical difficulties or things need to be like louder from our end or anything like that, please just throw it in the chat. Whoever is not speaking will monitor that. And if you have any questions, you can either put them in the chat while we're talking, or we will have plenty of time at the end for any Q&A. So with that, I will hand it off to Matt to get started with the greenhouse gas inventory.
All right, good evening, everyone. Like Brian said, my name is Matt Sullivan. I'm a planner here with Southern Tier Central, and I'm one of two regional climate smart communities coordinators. Work with the Schuyler, Steuben, and Chemung counties. And tonight, I'll be walking you through the government operations greenhouse gas inventory. So a greenhouse gas inventory for government operations is a crucial early step in the climate action planning process. An inventory like this allows day-to-day municipal operations to be tracked, analyzed, and reported. The greenhouse gas inventory summarizes greenhouse gas emissions from all government facilities. So this constitutes both energy consumption from government facilities. That energy might be in the form of electricity, propane, natural gas, or fuel oil, as well as fuel usage from government vehicles, which includes gasoline and diesel. And a summary of greenhouse gas emissions provides valuable insight. Municipal officials can identify their largest energy users and sources of emissions and explore avenues for greenhouse gas emission reduction and cost saving through future climate action planning. So communities that complete a greenhouse gas inventory can either complete it in support of the Climate Smart Community certification or outside of the Climate Smart Community certification. And if it's completed outside, it's still a valuable tool for governments to use in the decision-making process. Either way, the ultimate delivered data is valuable for identifying opportunities for governmental action and long-term emission reduction. Completing a greenhouse gas inventory provides valuable insight into how different sectors of local government use energy. The inventory provides breakdown by sector for energy usage, and getting a breakdown of energy usage by sector is important for establishing targeted goals. For example, if more emissions are coming from the vehicle fleet, the municipality can identify potential strategies for reduction, such as the purchase of a hybrid or a zero emission vehicle. If emissions are coming predominantly from the water district, the municipality can upgrade leak detection systems, water meters, take measures to reduce water loss, which would in turn utilize less electricity at the facility and thus lead to less emissions being generated over time. By comparing energy usage against the baseline year, local officials can see how energy usage has changed over time, and comparing emission data across a set of years can identify trends. So when a municipality gathers all this data and completes an inventory, they can compare data across years against events or projects that occurred in the municipality. So if a municipality expanded their water district or their wastewater or their sewer district, more electricity would be used, thus leading to more emissions in those years. If a town experienced a bad winter season, they would have their vehicles, there would be more emissions from their vehicles, as they would have more plowing duty and more salting duty for roadways. So comparing these trends against municipal projects or events can help identify goals going forward. And identifying trends in emissions makes it easier to outline potential actions that can reduce future emissions. If a municipality is completing this greenhouse gas inventory in pursuit of a climate smart community certification, many of these potential actions can earn a municipality points towards that certification. Some of these actions include interior lighting upgrades, HVAC upgrades, benchmarking of municipal buildings, clean energy upgrades, performing a fleet inventory, converting streetlights to LEDs, converting traffic signals to LEDs. And these actions can be completed independently of a greenhouse gas inventory. However, identifying large emitters can guide decisions on outlining and determining which action should be a priority within a community. So the greenhouse gas inventory serves as a framework for a government operations climate action plan. And this climate action plan is the next step in the climate smart community certification that builds off of the results of the greenhouse gas inventory. So the climate action plan defines greenhouse gas reduction targets and provides a framework for achieving those targets. Through this plan, we can identify priority actions and facilitate coordination across government departments. And we can establish methods for assessing progress and adjusting the local strategy if targets are surpassed or not fulfilled. And in the greenhouse gas inventory, we can discuss and identify some potential goals, but it's in the climate action plan that these goals are put into that larger framework, and timelines for emission reduction are more largely established. So now we will discuss the process of starting and completing this action. So first, we'll look at what type of emissions we're measuring when we perform a greenhouse gas inventory. In the process, we measure what the EPA defines as scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, which I'll elaborate further on. We're going to look at how we start the process, who takes the lead, where we can find the necessary data to measure emissions, and how does the ultimate reporting process work. So we'll walk through this outline. We'll walk through this outline and walk through a greenhouse gas inventory tool to essentially show how the process works from start to finish. So first, we'll look at what emissions are we measuring. So we're measuring scope 1 and scope 2 greenhouse gas emissions. The EPA defines scope 1 as direct greenhouse gas emissions, which include emissions from any government-owned vehicles, so any gas or diesel usage that any government vehicles are emitting, and then on-site fuel combustion, which can include natural gas, propane, or fuel oil at any government facility. So this includes town and village halls, highway department buildings, water, sewer, wastewater treatment facilities, landfill facilities. Any refrigerant leakage would count as on-site fuel combustion as well, or it would count as a direct greenhouse gas emission. And then we also look at scope 2, which are indirect greenhouse gas emissions. These include emissions from purchased electricity, purchased heating, and purchased cooling. So scope 2 emissions are considered indirect because they are generated at an external site, but processed at the site of usage because they are a result of that organization's energy usage. So for example, if NYSEG supplies the power to a village hall, NYSEG is generating that power offsite, delivering it to the village hall, and the village hall is utilizing that power, and the greenhouse gas emissions associated with that are associated with the village hall, the facility that it's used at. So in an inventory, we are measuring all energy used by all government facilities and government vehicles, which covers scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. So the first step in starting the greenhouse gas inventory is to assemble a team to conduct the inventory. If this action is being completed in pursuit of climate smart community certification, the Climate Smart Communities Task Force can undertake this process. If it's being done independent of certification, then a small team of dedicated volunteers can carry out the action. The volunteer team can include community members, town officials, or anyone interested in participating. Next, we will identify key contacts who will provide access to the data throughout the project. Data records are often managed by the town or the village clerk, so they will hold all the energy bills and the utility bills that you would have to go through when working through a greenhouse gas inventory. And after assembling a team, you can review your options for greenhouse gas inventory tools. So greenhouse gas inventory tools are free Excel tools that allow for the easy input of bill data. And from this bill data, the tool computes the associated emission data with using preset formulas. So you can shoot myself or Brian an email for further details. And the only thing to watch out for is that the greenhouse gas tool must be compliant with the local government operations protocol, but all the tools provided through the Climate Smart Communities program are in alignment with that protocol. So if you reach out to us, we can provide you with a wide range of tools that fit any process. So now we will work through an example of a greenhouse gas inventory tool. So this tool was developed by Climate Action Associates, and it's for government operations greenhouse gas inventory. So can everyone see it? Give me a thumbs up.
Not yet on my end.
Okay. How about now?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, excellent. All right, so this is an example of a greenhouse gas inventory tool. The introduction tab provides all the steps and outlines the steps for completing this greenhouse gas inventory. So step one would be creating a facility master list. So for this example, let's assume that the town of any town, New York, has a town hall, a highway department, a water treatment plant, a North Park office and a South Park office, and various streetlights throughout the town. So first, we would work through the facility master list and explicitly name each facility that the town operates. And we would slide over to the next tab or the next column, and we would input the proper reporting sector. So town hall would be administration facilities. Highway department would also be administration facilities. Water treatment plant would be water delivery facilities. North Park office would be administration facilities. South Park office would be administration. Streetlights would be streetlights. And let's also say that the town operates a vehicle fleet consisting of 8 diesel Ford 350s, 3 diesel snowplows, 2 gasoline powered water trucks, and 4 diesel assorted park maintenance vehicles. So I will input vehicle fleet into its own row, and then slide over and click vehicle fleet. And then you just put the address. So let's say 123 Main Street, and work your way down. At the town hall, let's say for this example, it's powered by electricity and propane. So you would work through each of these columns, which are the energy sources, and select which energy sources serve the facility. So highway department runs on propane as well. The water department, let's say the park office, runs on electricity and propane. Say the park office also runs. Now we're in streetlights. Streetlights just run on electricity. And the vehicle fleet, we would slide over, and the vehicle fleet runs on diesel, mix of diesel and gasoline for their vehicles. So next, we'll go to energy provider accounts. So what I'll first do here is copy this, bring it over to energy provider accounts, and I'll paste it into here. So we have the facility and group name just like we did in the facility master list. And we would input the account number. So let's say, for example, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And the associated bill details, if there's any necessary bill details. So going back to here, we see that the town hall is served by electricity and propane. So in energy provider accounts, I'm going to need a second row for town hall, because one of them is electricity and one of them is propane. So the vendor for electricity, let's say it's NYSEG, and the vendor for propane, let's just call it Propane Incorporated. And the units for electricity are kilowatt hours, and the units for propane are gallons. So I would just go through the same process, identifying the account number, the vendor, the energy source, and the appropriate unit for each facility. And if a facility is served by more than one energy source, I would just list it out with both energy sources. Next, we will jump to electric data, monthly electric data. So I'm going to once again copy this. And I'm going to paste it into here. And now we have the facility name. And we have the account number, which we're pulling from the energy provider accounts. And we have the bill. Now we have to input the monthly bill data. So start with your first facility, town hall, and we just go across the column and fill in the required data. All of the data, including the account number, start date, end date, total kilowatt hours, and total charges can be found on the utility bills provided by the town or village clerk. If we have, like we had before, town hall is served by electricity and propane, it's a different bill. So you just do one column for town hall electricity and one column for town hall propane. Now, in this case, we need to sum all this data and bring it back to electric data annual. So we'll copy and paste that one more time, fill in the appropriate account numbers, do a manual sum of the monthly bill data, and obtain the total annual total charges and annual kilowatt hours. So we would do this for the year that we're selecting. So let's say we were looking at 2020 data and our baseline year. So we're comparing 2020 emissions data against 2015. So we'd have one column for town hall for 2020 and one column for town hall for 2015 for electric data. And then same thing, one column for town hall, 2020 propane, 2015 propane. And we would just summarize the electric and the annual electric data. If it's appropriate, we would then repeat these steps for natural gas. If any of the facilities are powered by natural gas. For this example, municipal facilities of any town, New York, run on electricity and propane. So we don't have any natural gas data to input. We'll just jump over to tank fuels. And we'll have the town hall runs on propane for the year 2020. Let's say in the year 2020, the town hall used 900 gallons of propane at $5 a gallon for this example. So they spent $4,000 on propane in 2020. So we see that it auto-fills out the remainder of the column, and you would just fill this out for any appropriate facility that utilizes propane. Lastly, we would jump to the vehicle fleet fuel. Here we would input the vehicle fleet, the year that we're looking at, the department, all departments. Let's say that in that vehicle fleet of 8 pickup trucks, 3 snow plows, 2 gasoline powered water trucks, and 4 diesel assorted park maintenance vehicles, they used 3,000 gallons of gasoline and 15,000 gallons of diesel, just for the sake of this example. You would put the associated costs for gasoline and the associated costs for diesel. You do the same thing for your baseline year as well. Similar to the electric data, this data can be obtained from the bills, which are held by the town and village clerk. Once we've input all this data, we move back to the beginning of the sheet. Greenhouse gas inventory. So as we saw, where I inputted segments of the data, it autofills out into this section of it and onto the sheet, the greenhouse gas inventory sheet. So we see that the vehicle fleet section autofilled from the vehicle fleet tab for data for 2020, totaling 3,000 gallons of gasoline, 15,000 gallons of diesel. If you were to fill out the entire sheet with the correct data, all of these other sections would automatically autofill, and you would get you would be delivered some charts and tables which can be modified by the user as appropriate. So you'd have a pretty complete picture of your municipality's greenhouse gas emissions for your year and for your year of analysis and your baseline year. Now I will back to the PowerPoint. So once we work through the greenhouse gas inventory tool, the next step is the reporting process. So after we've input all the energy consumption data and worked through the tool, the Excel sheet automatically generates the emission data using a series of preset formulas. And the next step is to synthesize this data into a report. You would deliver this finalized report to municipal officials. They adopt it into the public record. We make it publicly available for residents to view. So I'll just walk through a quick example of the town of Hector's final government operations greenhouse gas inventory report, which was adopted by their town board and made publicly available. Did everyone see this? All right, so this is the town of Hector's greenhouse gas emissions inventory for the comparison of 2019, 2020, and 2021. So in this report, we start with a brief introduction, brief methodology of what exactly we did when we completed this inventory. We noted that the tool we used was in compliance with the local government operations protocol, gave a brief overview of greenhouse gas emissions and energy usage across the state as a whole. And then we focus on the town of Hector in particular. So we summarize stationary combustion of fossil fuels, which was natural gas energy use, or in this case, propane energy usage over the calendar year. So we see that propane consumption and percentage use, or consumption and thus use percentage kind of chain increased from 2019 to 2020 and decreased from 2020 to 2021. And essentially you take the tables generated from the greenhouse gas inventory tool and you provide a brief narrative description of each energy sector. So then we went to electricity consumption, gave a brief overview of the changes in electricity consumption in kilowatt hours from year to year, looked at it by sector, identified through the report which sectors were large emitters and which ones saw large reductions in emissions between 2019 and 2021. And we looked at mobile combustion of fossil fuels through the municipal vehicle fleet, looked at gasoline and diesel usage from 2019 to 2021, and looked at how use decreased from 2019 to 2020 and increased from 2020 to 2021. And we gave a brief narrative describing why that might be the case. So in the case of vehicle fossil fuel emissions, one possible reason may be different winter weather conditions. A harsher winter season could result in the town having to plow roads more frequently. And the town of Hector has 155 miles of roads, so the fuel usage in those instances is a great contributor to emission results. On the contrary, a mild winter weather season would result in a reduction of fuel usage and a reduction in emission results. So we conclude the report by providing a summary of emissions as a whole, talk about what the town is currently doing to reduce emissions, and provide brief conclusions and identify some opportunities for change in the right direction in the future. So, like I mentioned earlier, outlining a set of goals, or coming up with some potential ideas, and identifying that this greenhouse gas inventory can be used as the framework for future government operations climate action plan. All right, and as climate smart communities coordinators, we can provide free technical assistance in the greenhouse gas inventory process. So our assistance can be with data collection and data input. We can provide assistance in report writing and analysis of emissions data, and we can provide answers to any questions that a municipality may have during the process. I will now pass it back over to Brian, who will take us through the climate vulnerability assessment.
Thanks, Matt. Before I jump into that, does anyone have any questions on the greenhouse gas inventory up front? I see a thumbs up. Okay, Roxanne, yep. If you wanna, I think you can unmute yourself if you would like to ask.
Yeah, sorry, I hit the thumb instead of the hand. Yeah, I mean, my question is with that, the Excel sheets, and they have the equations in and all, and is there a way to take into account, for example, our town hall has solar panels on it, so we generate a fair amount of electricity. The reports that you get from the utilities don't give enough detail to be able to input correctly the energy use, and I have not been able to see how the reporting tool that I was looking at can take into account sustainably generated electricity, so you're not assigning a greenhouse gas CO2 equivalent factor to it. We also purchase 100% certified sustainably generated electricity for the rest of our town's use. So do you know if there's some guidance on that? Have you guys thought about that? Have people asked you that before?
I have not been approached with this question up to this point. That is a very interesting point, though, and one that I don't think that the current tools account for. But I will definitely make a note of that and shoot that up the chain to higher ups in the Climate Smart Communities program to ask. But if Brian has any further insight.
I don't have any further insight, but what we can do, Roxanne, is we'll shoot that up to, there's two people kind of who we're in direct contact with at the Office of Climate Change at DEC, and also somebody in the Central New York region, and they might have a better insight, and we can definitely send you an email after this once we get a response from them. But that is, like Matt said,
that would be great.
Really good
Thanks.
point. Yeah.
And I'm not in your region. I'm in Tompkins County, but I think we're in between climate smart communities coordinators right now. So if you could help with that, that would be awesome. I started trying to play with it, and then I got sidetracked with other things, and so I haven't gone back to it, but it's definitely an issue.
Yeah, no, we can definitely do that. And yes,
okay.
I know Rachel left, and they're still looking for someone for Tompkins County. So
okay, so did you say you're going to talk to the climate? Who are you going to talk to at DEC?
So there's I don't know if you've reached out to them. Her name's Dazzle Ekblad.
Oh yeah, I've seen her name. Yeah,
so she's her, and there's another person there who are her name's Willow. They're like the joint coordinators at the state level of the entire state program. And there's also someone who does a lot of stuff in Central New York, who we work with on a pretty regular basis with some of those counties in the Syracuse area. So we'll reach out to both of them and see what they've done with that issue, or if they have any insights on how to actually do that.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Yeah, no problem. Matt, I actually have two very quick questions for you before we move on. And the first one is, how can you explain the difference between a community and a government operations greenhouse gas inventory?
Yeah, so community greenhouse gas inventory accounts for larger scale projects throughout the community. The government operations greenhouse gas inventory accounts explicitly for government-owned facilities and government-owned vehicles. So any government operations fall under the umbrella of the government operations greenhouse gas inventory. Does that
Oh, yeah,
Sorry,
no, that's
I
perfect.
muted myself.
Yeah, yeah. And do the example you showed, they had 3 years. Do you need multiple years, or is it okay to just pick 1 year and do the
So
baseline?
you need at least 1 year for your baseline and at least one more recent selected year. So you could do 2015 versus 2020. That was the example I used, or you could compare across multiple years. So the town of Hector decided to compare 2019 to 2021 because they felt that that gave a better picture of their emissions over time, as opposed to just comparing 1-to-1. But greenhouse gas inventory, government operation greenhouse gas inventories can be conducted either way, with just 2 years or 3 years or 4 years if you really wanted to get a better picture, get a better idea of the scope. But generally speaking, you really just need at least one baseline year, and then you can build it up from there.
Awesome. All right, so moving on to the climate vulnerability assessment. So this is like how Matt was talking about greenhouse gases and emissions and accounting for those emissions to kind of inform maybe a climate action plan or areas of the municipality, the government operations that have are more energy intensive or are emitting more. The climate vulnerability assessment is more focused on climate hazards and preparing your community for adaptation and resilience measures. And so it's that first step into thinking about these vulnerabilities that might occur due to climate change to different areas of your community. And it is community-wide instead of just focusing on the government operations. So what it does is hopefully provides a foundation to developing an effective strategy to adapt to climate change, and provides a way for your community to analyze and prioritize which areas of the community need to be prioritized for mitigation efforts. So climate change won't affect all people and assets within the community the same. So an example would be that if you have a house located in a floodplain, that will likely be affected by increased flooding more than somebody who has a house outside of the floodplain. And that's this graphic on the lower right that just shows kind of the stream channel, the floodway, and the flood hazard area, which is that 1 in 100 year storm. And as climate change occurs, we would expect that 1 in 100 year storm to occur more frequently. So that is just, so this process going through the vulnerability assessment will hopefully enable the community to identify kind of which areas might be more vulnerable. You can go to the next slide, Matt. So why do a climate vulnerability assessment? It's another tool that can be utilized to inform municipal zoning or subdivision laws, comprehensive plan, and an adaptation plan. So in addition to identifying those vulnerabilities, it's one of these studies that we can use to inform your land use regulations if you have them in your town, and also the comprehensive plan, even if your town doesn't have zoning or subdivision regulations. And kind of a cool publication that New York State Department of State has released is a document outlining model local laws for increasing resilience. And this vulnerability assessment could inform the adoption of those local laws. So they have some examples of how to zone for post-disaster activities, how to maybe implement design requirements for elevated buildings in the floodplain, like we were just talking about kind of a little bit in the previous slide, and different things like that. And finally, another reason to do this outside of just identifying the vulnerabilities and prioritizing is if there's a big drop of money that comes from the state or federal government for climate resiliency or infrastructure, like ARPA in recent years, your municipality now has a document to refer to for priority projects. Yeah, I was going to say next slide, Matt, which should be good. So kind of launching right into what do we do? How do we actually create a climate vulnerability assessment document? So the first thing would be to determine the scope. Does your community want to focus on one hazard or all hazards? So for example, in Eastern New York, outside of Albany, the town of New Lebanon decided to focus only on seasonal drought. Whereas in the North Country, the village and town of Potsdam decided to focus on flooding, microbursts, and severe winter storms and be a little more comprehensive. And one thing to notice too is that the village and town of Potsdam did a joint climate vulnerability assessment. So if you have good relations with either if there's a village within your town or neighboring municipalities, you can actually do a joint climate vulnerability assessment with them if you think that would be helpful. The next kind of first steps is researching relevant studies that will assist with determining your scope and identifying hazards, and that provides a starting point. And a really good document for this is the County Hazard Mitigation Plan, because that will really point you towards the existing hazards in your region. Quite a few counties also, they break down their hazards by municipality. It kind of depends on the county. I just put the cover pages of Schuyler, Steuben, and Chemung counties up here, but that is a really good document to start with. The last thing that's not on this slide would be to create a working group to actually develop the vulnerability assessment. This might be your, if you're involved in climate smart communities, your task force. If you're not involved in climate smart communities, just creating some sort of working group or task force to actually carry this out, because it's not just one person who's kind of deciding everything. So that's step one. So you can go to the next slide, Matt. So a little bit interactive. Just off the top of your head, if everyone could put in the chat what climate-related hazards are present in your community that you can think of. And one big one, at least in our region, that we know of is flooding. Yep, there's somebody just put that in. Perfect. Flood, a lot of flood. All right. Pretty much kind of what I expected, honestly, is flood. Severe winter storms, okay. Drought, a lot of residents on well water. Severe summer winter storms, yep. Tornado, yep. Non-permeable surfaces. Storm blow down trees, yep. Perfect. All right, I think we've got a pretty good list there. So all of these, and it sounds like flood, which a lot of my examples do come, are related to flooding throughout this presentation because I was kind of expecting that. But yep, those severe winter storms, drought, those are all things that you can decide whether or not you want your climate vulnerability assessment to focus on. And if flooding is the main issue and you want to devote the entire document to that, that is perfectly fine. If you want to be a bit more comprehensive and address multiple vulnerabilities, that is also fine as well. It is really up to you and time and interest and all of those kinds of things. So Matt, if you can go to the next slide. Awesome. So, so once we've kind of gone through and you've got your working group, you've decided what your scope is going to be, what hazards you're going to focus on, you've kind of looked at some of those existing studies. The next thing is to assess potential impacts to the assets and systems in your community. So community assets and systems can include things like municipal services, so fire, police, public works. It can be anything related to energy and power. I've noticed a couple of comments already that a lot of residents are on well water. So the water service, any water systems, parks and public land, farms and agriculture, any natural assets or systems. I've got a couple of pictures up here of the farmer's market, fire department, a water filtration plant, a golf course, recreational. So those are kind of community assets and systems, and you want to think about what the effect on these systems are going to be. So A quick example, which we're going to dive in a little more later, is like that fire department. Is that fire department in a floodplain? And we're going to talk about how you can assess a potential impact of that building and how that might impact your community later on. But Matt, if you can go to the next slide. Again, what kind of assets or systems are present in your community? And I was wondering if people could put in the chat anything like, is there a specific park that is an asset to the community? Kind of even the name of a fire station, things like that, do you have a wastewater treatment plant? Like those kind of things, everyone could take a second to think about what's in their community and maybe put a couple things in the chat. All right, park station, also a high hazard dam. You know, parks, fire stations, have a water distribution system. Great. Sewer district, yep. State park, steep slopes down to lakeshore, residential wells, yep. Town park, town pool, fire department, yep. These are all great things that when we're going through the vulnerability assessment, you'd think about, okay, how will impacts from climate change affect them? Solid waste facilities, yep, all of that. Awesome, good stuff. All right, so now when we are actually, yep, town pool, park, boat launches, all of those, great. So when we're actually assessing the impact, so we've now we've gone through and we've got our working group, we've figured out our scope, we've looked at some existing studies, we've identified what some important assets and systems to our community are. Now we're going to focus on assessing potential impacts. And the way that we do this is to look at exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. And those three things combined kind of equal vulnerability. So the exposure is whether an asset or a system is located in an area likely to experience the effect of climate change, hazard now or in the future. Sensitivity, how an asset or a system fares when it's exposed to the climate hazard. And adaptive capacity is the ability of the asset or the system to adjust to actual or expected climate stresses. So Matt, if you can go to the next slide, I think this example kind of illustrates that pretty well. So a firehouse is currently located on a small rise just outside the special flood hazard area. So that's the floodplain, your 100-year floodplain. However, the access road to the firehouse is below the base flood elevation and subject to inundation by the 1% 100-year storm. Climate change projections indicate that by 2050, the building itself will likely be inundated by more frequent storm events. So its exposure is significant. It's going to be affected by these more frequent storm events, and the access road is below the base flood elevation and will be subject to that inundation. In 2050, climate change projections show the firehouse as inundated by 6 inches of water during that 1% storm. So that means its sensitivity is significant. So when when more frequent storms occur, this firehouse is going to be exposed more often, and they're projecting that it's going to flood up to 6 inches of water. So that means, Matt, if you can go back to the last slide for a quick second. Yep, so how it fares is that it's going to flood. There's not that much flood protection around it. You can go to back to the example. Then the firehouse is a historic brick building built on a slab with a low-lying access road. It services a community that is very developed with little available open space outside the special flood hazard area. So that means that adaptive capacity of the firehouse and the area around it is low. One thing I should have mentioned when we were on the last slide, Matt, if you can go back to that last slide one more time, is that when you're assessing, you're looking at, is the exposure high, is the sensitivity high, and is the adaptive capacity low? And those are the assets and systems that you want to prioritize. I know that we've got like a plus and plus and plus, but just kind of thinking about that is that we do want to prioritize assets that the adaptive capacity is low, not high, because if its adaptive capacity is already high, then that might be something that is less vulnerable. So Matt, if you can go to back to the example, this firehouse, it's a historic building. It's gonna be, it might be kind of hard to like flood proof this. And there's very little available open space outside the floodplain. So even if the town wanted to move the firehouse or the trucks and the operations to a different building, there's not really another spot for them to go. All right, so we can move on. So now, once we've gone through and gone through all of our assets and our systems, we also want to look at identifying vulnerable populations. So populations can be vulnerable due to a variety of reasons, like lack of mobility, which might be create difficulty when evacuating. So for example, if there's a retirement home and people are not as mobile, there might be more difficulty when evacuating. Or it could be something economic, like lost wages due to the type of job somebody has during a severe weather event. And so I've got a couple of examples here. This first one is from the lower Wappinger Creek watershed communities. So that's down in the Hudson Valley. They did a climate vulnerability assessment and identified this, I'm not sure 100%, but I would assume it might be a affordable housing complex, which is a strength of the community that they have this complex, but the low-income resident population is characterized as vulnerable there. And another highly vulnerable population would be the residents with a perceived lack of mobility who might not be able to evacuate, kind of like I said before. And if you can go to the next slide, Matt. The town and village of Potsdam looked at the economic impact of something like a severe storm. And I'm not exactly sure, I think they might have done it in conjunction with one of the universities up there, but they actually looked at like an economic impact of the ice storm of 1998. And what they found is that there was more lost wages depending on which industry you worked in. So office and admin support lost more wages than food preparation and serving related jobs. Also things like hospital jobs and like highway department jobs were able to kind of, I'm not sure what the right word is, adapt, or since they were essential, they worked through this ice storm, but office and administrative support did not. And there was quite a bit of lost wages from that. So your vulnerable populations, it can be something like they're in a flood, can someone evacuate? Or it could be something along the lines of economic impact, like wage loss. You can go to the next slide, Matt. So at this point in the process, you've got your own working group, you've got your hazards, you've got your assets and systems, you've worked within yourself to kind of evaluate those assets and systems and look at their sensitivity, exposure, adaptive capacity. You've identified your vulnerable populations. And the next step is public participation. And so it's really recommended, it's not a requirement, but it is really recommended that at minimum one public meeting occurs to share a summary of findings with the community, as that's a really integral part of the climate vulnerability assessment process. It's a really good forum for public input. There might be assets or systems that you missed. There might be vulnerable populations that weren't included, but at a public meeting, somebody might bring them up. There might also be things that you've rated their sensitivity or adaptive capacity or exposure one kind of way, and people might have another opinion. And that is a really good discussion to have and get the public viewpoint. So having public participation at this point in the process is a really, really good idea. And so the next slide. So now you've kind of got all of your data and you've done all your research, you've got all your data, you've thought about, okay, like how are we assessing all of our assets? You've thought about exposure, sensitivity, adaptive capacity, all of those things. Now it's time to prioritize these assets and systems. And this is your priority of like, okay, if we had like money to fix like a couple of things, what would we most prioritize? Kind of like I said back at the beginning, like an infrastructure money drop happens. What are the most important things? Or are there grants out there that we can prioritize going after in order to increase adaptive capacity and increase resilience in our community? And so the factors to use are those exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity factors, but also considering how critical these assets and systems are to the functioning and prosperity of the community, and what their ability to reduce vulnerabilities and risks in the community and to vulnerable populations are. So it goes a little bit beyond that, those three kind of straight exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity, and kind of it's thinking about, in a global sense, how critical is this road, for example, to the functioning of the community. If this bridge was washed out, that would be a huge risk, or etc. And so to kind of walk through how this might occur, if you can go to the next slide, I'm going to launch a poll in a minute, but I adapted this from the climate vulnerability assessment from Hastings-on-Hudson, New York. And so these are two assets that they had identified in their climate vulnerability assessment, and they've prioritized one asset over the other. And so I'm going to kind of read that out and see what you all think based on sensitivity, exposure, adaptive capacity, importance to the functioning or prosperity of the community, and ability to reduce vulnerabilities, which one you think should be prioritized. So the first one is a bridge, and this bridge is the only east-west connection in the municipality that the municipality has to the rest of the county. It's also the only way to cross a major state road that is historically sensitive to flooding, and the bridge is currently being replaced, which will increase its adaptive capacity. Asset system number 2 is a major state road and nearby residential streets that flood often. Almost all land around these roads are within the special flood hazard area, that 100-year floodplain. The major state road is historically sensitive to flooding and has become completely submerged after heavy precipitation several times in recent years, which renders it unusable during emergencies. So kind of based on all the things we've talked about, which asset do you think should be prioritized? And there's not necessarily a right answer, but I'm going to launch the poll, and then I will tell you what the Village of Hastings-on-Hudson decided. All right, I have all right, I have 7 responses. I'll give it another like 30 seconds or so. All right, 8 responses. Let's see. And all right. Think we should be good. I will end the poll now, and I will share the results. I think people can hopefully see this. So we have 5 who thought that the major state road should be prioritized, and 3 who thought the bridge should be prioritized. So stop sharing the results. And again, there's no right answer, but the Village of Hastings-on-Hudson did decide to prioritize the major state road. And I just wanted to kind of go through a little bit of how they potentially came to this conclusion. I was not there. I can only go off of what they actually published in their report, but here is kind of some things that maybe they considered when they were thinking through this. So the bridge appears to be above this base flood elevation because it doesn't actually flood when these heavy storm events occur, and it is one of those ways to go across the flooded road. So its exposure seems to be lower than that major state road that has significant exposure as the road is in that 100-year floodplain. In terms of sensitivity, it's kind of similar to that exposure in that the bridge doesn't often appear to flood during these or after these heavy precipitation events, but the major state road is historically prone to flooding and has become completely submerged after heavy precipitation. In terms of adaptive capacity, the bridge is going under undergoing improvements that will improve the adaptive capacity. So its adaptive capacity is higher than that of the road, which has a questionable adaptive capacity because it goes through this floodplain and all of the land around it are in the floodplain. So there's kind of less things that could probably happen in order to prevent flooding on the road. In terms of importance to the community, it appears that both have a high importance to the community, as the bridge is the only east-west connection to the rest of the county, and the state road also is high importance to the community as a major state road for transportation. And its ability to reduce vulnerabilities, the bridge really has a high ability to reduce vulnerabilities as it provides a way across the flooded road, and the state road has a low ability to reduce vulnerabilities as it's unusable during these heavy precipitation events. So when you're going through these, there might be, in terms of for the bridge, like that ability to reduce other vulnerabilities might mean that, hey, like we need to prioritize that bridge above the state road because this is our only way east-west, and we know right now that it's not flooding. We need to make sure that it's good. Like, let's say you're like, okay, there's nothing that's going to happen with the state road in the future, so we're prioritizing the bridge and making sure we can do everything we can. Or the state road where, let's say you're able to, put in some improvements to prevent flooding. It does have a higher exposure and sensitivity, and I think a lower adaptive capacity. So kind of judging on a couple of those things, that I think is why Hastings-on-Hudson decided to prioritize the state road over the bridge in terms of when they were listing out their priorities in their climate vulnerability assessment. So you can go to the next slide, Matt. The last thing, apart from putting this all together in a document that's a report, is that you should provide a timeline for updates of this. So in general, climate vulnerability assessments should be updated approximately every 10 years. As a note, there does not need to be an implementation plan accompanying this vulnerability assessment. That would happen in your climate adaptation plan. And that is something that we are actually going to do a training on. I think we have it scheduled in June on the action plan and the adaptation plan. So taking that greenhouse gas inventory into climate action, how do you reduce emissions? Taking this climate vulnerability assessment and putting it into action and implementation, that adaptation plan. So that doesn't need to be a part of this. The only thing that has to be a part of the vulnerability assessment is that prioritization of different assets and systems in the community, so that if you're able to do something to increase their resilience or increase their adaptive capacity, those would be the priority. And I might have said this, but I'll just say it again. They should be updated every 10 years, this climate vulnerability assessment. It could be updated every 5 years. It could be updated kind of on whatever cycle you or your community would like. And Matt, if you can go to the next slide. So I'll just highlight a couple of resources and technical assistance. There is a New York State Department of State tool to help communities along rivers prioritize flood and erosion risk reduction measures. So that is a good thing to know about. And Matt and I have the link to that tool. If anyone wants it, we can for sure send it along. I'll try and send out the links to both of these things when I send out the materials from this session. Heat hazards, the Department of Health has developed a heat vulnerability index to identify areas with high proportions of heat vulnerable populations. So that is also a useful tool and something to take a look at to see if there are, if you are in an area with a high proportion of a heat vulnerable population. And technical assistance. So climate smart communities coordinators can assist with leading the working group through the process, public engagement, and writing of the report. We can definitely assist your community. It does have to be a community-led process, but with any of these kind of things in terms of thinking about how to prioritize, facilitating maybe that public meeting, and definitely writing up a final report, we can definitely help with that. So with that, I think that might be it, and we'll open it up to any questions that anyone has. And in the meantime, while people are thinking, I'll just say that probably early next week, you'll all get an email with your training certificate if you need that for Planning Board, Zoning Board of Appeals members. The PowerPoint presentation, important links, and a recording of this. And the recording will also be posted on Southern Tier Central's website if you want to share it with anyone. But I'll give it another minute or two. All right, and Matt and I will hang on for another couple minutes in case anyone does have a question for us. And you can always, Matt, if you want to go to the next slide, reach out to us. Great, and thank you all. I'm glad that it seems like people found it helpful and informative. Yeah, and Albert. Yeah, I can definitely put some next steps in the email that I send out after words. All right. Awesome. I'm going to stop the recording. And that's all we have. Thank you again, everyone, for coming.
Yep. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time.